Hi, my name is Dee. Welcome to OTCMStudio, where today I'll be showing you how to make the Tiramisu vest. This vest has two variations, one with an asymmetrical button closure at the front and one with a straight one. It has full pockets and optional ties at the back. It is also fully lined, which means you can wear it on its own or with a t-shirt or a blouse underneath. So let's just jump right into it. So you can see here the wrong side of the fabric, and I transferred the markings for the darts for both the bust and the waist darts. Bring the darts together, the two lines. You can see I'm matching up the two lines and pin them in place. Stitch the darts closed on the front, both the bust and the waist darts, and then repeat on the other front piece. Then you'll also repeat all of these steps on the front lining pieces. So stitch the darts closed on the bust and the waist on both of the front lining pieces. As you can see, I backstitched at the front of the dart, but I didn't at the point. You will have to tie ends of the threads together into a knot and clip them. Then press the bust dart down. Here I've just pinned the waist darts, you can see. And then I'm going to go ahead and sew these darts. Again, backstitch at the start, but don't backstitch at the point. Fold the pocket in half along the long side with right sides together, and then pin and stitch along the short sides. I am stitching with a 1.5 cm seam allowance. As long as the pattern instructions don't say otherwise, we'll always be working with a 1.5 cm seam allowance. Then go ahead and trim the seam allowance on both of these short sides, and you can also clip the corners to make it easier to turn it right side out. Make sure not to clip into the actual stitching. Once you've turned the pocket tab to the right side, press it so that the fabric lays nice and flat. Sew a line of basting stitches 1.5 centimeters away from the open edge. This will help us when we're placing it on the front piece. Grab the front pattern piece of your main fabric and line up the basted line with the marking on the pattern. Pin it in place. Here you can see I am making sure that the lines match up. Backstitch at the front and the end and sew this in place. You can remove the basting stitches afterwards if you like. Trim the seam close to the stitching, and then press the pocket upwards and press it in place. Stitch the pockets down close to the sides. You can also hand stitch these with a slip stitch so they're invisible. If you're adding ties, grab one of your tie pieces and fold it in half with right sides together and sew along the short edge and the long edge. Leave the ends on one of the short sides open so that you can then turn it right side out. I find it easier to start sewing at the short end and then stopping 1.5 centimeter away from the hem, lifting the presser foot, turning the fabric, and then continuing on with the 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. Then you can trim the seam allowance and clip the corner. Again, make sure not to clip into the stitching line. Sorry for the camera sometimes going out of focus. I'm not sure what's happening here. Put the ties aside for now and move on to working on the back pattern piece. Close the darts on the back pattern pieces and the back lining pieces. You can see I am matching up the two lines, first with pins and then folding the fabric in half with right sides facing and pinning the dart. Backstitch at the beginning of the dart, but then don't backstitch at the point and just tie the remaining threads into a knot and clip it. Press the seams towards the center back. Then flip one of the pieces around and then place the two back pieces together with right sides facing and pin at the center back. Then with the normal seam allowance, go ahead and stitch these together. Don't stitch the lining pieces together yet because we need to add the facing to them. So I have interfaced my facing pieces and I need to attach these now. Pin one back facing to the back lining with right sides together and then stitch them together. Press the seam allowance towards the lining. Go slowly and make sure that the lining isn't bunched up underneath the facing piece. You can see I have used quite a lot of pins because this is two different curves. And I am constantly checking to make sure that the fabric is still in place. Once you have sewn them together, make sure that there's no bunching anywhere and then press the seam towards the lining. As you can see here, I am trimming the seam just to make it easier to later press in place. Now, just like you've done with the main fabric, place the two back lining pieces that you have just attached the facing to and pin them with right sides together. Stitch along the center back with a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. And then press the seams open on both the lining pieces and the back pattern pieces. So if you're adding the ties, Place one tie on top of the back on the pretty side of the fabric with the large dots matching. So the tie is essentially between those two large dots. Pin this in place and then baste it and repeat it on the other side. Now place one of the front pattern pieces on top of the back pattern piece and pin them together at the shoulder. They should be with right side spacing, so pretty side to pretty side, and then you can stitch them together with a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance and then press the seams open. Repeat these steps with the lining pieces as well. You can see from above here how I am attaching the front and the back pieces together at the shoulder. We are getting closer to the finish line. Place the lining of the fabric down in front of you and then place the main fabric on top with right side spacing. Match up the seam lines at the shoulder and start pinning it in place. So you can see I have pinned the two pieces together. I matched them at the back center and also at the shoulder seam allowances. And then starting from the hem, I am going around with a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance and stitching these two together. Go slowly at the curve at the neckline to make sure that it's nice and clean. Trim the seam allowance all along the neckline. Understitch along the lining, all the way from the hem along the neckline. This means that you need to make sure that the seam allowance is pressed towards the lining fabric and that when you're understitching, you make sure that the seams are under the lining and you're sewing through both the lining fabric and the two layers of the seams. Go carefully, make sure that you're going carefully and that you are constantly checking that the seams are pressed towards the lining. Now fold the front lining and the front main piece together so that the right sides are facing. And pin it at the bottom, so you see the V where I've pinned it in place, and then sew these together on both sides with a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. Start sewing where you've just sewn together the front and the lining, and once you get to the V at the point, lift your presser foot, turn the fabric and put the presser foot down again and continue sewing with the seam allowance. Then go ahead and trim it so that it will be easier to turn right side out later. Understitch as far as you can. This might mean that you can't get all the way into the point at the V, but just go as far as you are able to. And remember to pull the seam towards the lining fabric. You can see I'm checking sometimes, and sew through both the lining fabric and the seam allowance. If you're adding the ties, pin them onto the fabric so that they are not getting caught when you sew the lining and the main fabric together. Now pin the back lining and the back together with right sides facing along the hem and stitch. Make sure that the seams and the darts are lining up. Once again, trim the seam allowance. Once again, understitch on the lining, making sure that the seam is pressed towards the lining and that you're sewing through all of those layers. Here I'm just checking that the understitching looks good, but then I am turning it wrong side again. The right sides of the lining and the main fabric should still be facing each other. You will now be working on the underarm seams. Pin the armhole edges of the lining and the main fabric together with right sides facing still. Match up the shoulder seams and the ends of the underarm. So pin it all together and then sew with a 1.5 centimeter seam allowance. This construction method might look a little weird, but it means that you won't be able to see any stitching from the outside, as we won't be top stitching anything. Once you have sewn these two together, repeat on the other side with the lining and the main fabric. Trim the seam allowance, and then, as you've done in the previous steps, also try and understitch on the lining. You can, however, skip this last understitching. I don't think it will make a big difference once you have pressed your fabric at the end. Now for the exciting part, you can turn your vest right side out. That means reaching in through the side at the back and pulling the fronts through, which I am trying to show you here, but it's not very easy. So just make sure that you're pulling both of the front pieces through the same hole at the back side. Otherwise it might get a bit tangled up. Once you have turned everything right side out, give it a good press along the seams that you have just sewn. You can see here that the only open seams are at the front sides and the front back. So I've given this a press, and I still have the ties pinned in place just to make sure that they don't get tangled up. Bring the front piece and the back piece together on the side. And as you can see, I will be working on pinning the two main fabrics together as they are. So bring one front side and one back side of the main fabrics together with right sides together and align the underarm seams and pin it in place. So pin it in place alongside the main fabric. Ideally, start about 4 centimeters above the seam line and pin them together. It is a little fiddly, so go very slowly, and you can use as many pins as you want. You can see here I have pinned the main fabrics together, and then I will pin part of the lining as well, and that's where I will start to sew. Start sewing at the lining where you started to pin these together, and it will make sense later on why we're doing this. Be careful, you're only sewing through 2 layers of fabric. So when you're starting at the lining, you're only sewing through 2 layers of the lining fabric. When you've continued across the seam onto the main fabric, you're only sewing through 2 layers of the main fabric. Don't catch the lining. So you can kind of see here, I am starting to sew at the lining. I am backstitching and then slowly continuing on to the main fabric with the normal seam allowance. I didn't speed this bit up so that it would be clear what I'm doing. So here I will be getting to the point where the main fabric ends and the lining starts again. And I will continue to sew for about 4 centimeters along the lining fabric again, or as far as you can go. What this means is that you can see it's a little messed up right now. Once you pull the sides, there will be a hole in the lining. From the outside you can't see where you attach these pieces, and you can hand stitch this hole closed. So using a slip stitching method, you can sew these pieces together. Sorry about the different colors throughout the video. Some of these were filmed at night when there was no natural light, and some of these were filmed in natural light. So that's why the pinks are a bit weird throughout. Slip stitching will allow you to sew these seams together without showing the actual stitching. This is also sometimes referred to as the ladder stitch. So tie a knot at the end and then insert your needle into one of the folds from the inside and pull it through so that you're hiding the actual knot. Then bring the needle across to the other side, the other fold, and pick up a little bit of the fabric. And then go across to the original side, a little further along, pick up a little piece of fabric, go back to the other side and continue doing so all the way until you reach the end. Once you have reached the end, create a little loop with your thread and pull the needle through that, and that will tie your knot. Then clip that. Repeat this on the other side, on the opening of the lining fabric. Mark the buttonholes along the right side of the front and then sew them. So here you can see I am using the buttonhole placement guide and just marking through it, making sure that everything is lined up. I am using the friction erasable pens. These markings will disappear if you use heat. Time to sew the buttonholes. So I've added my button to my buttonhole foot maker. I don't know what these are called. And I'm just switching my machine to the right settings. I like to put a pin at the end of the buttonhole so that I know where to start sewing, because you can't see that when you have that foot above. So I line up the pin with the hole on the foot and then remove it before I start sewing. So here I'm creating all the buttonholes for the vest. Using the placement guide, mark the center front on both sides so that you can match up the two sides and know where to sew the buttons. So you can see I'm just matching it up with the V and then marking the center front. I am marking it on the hem and also at the top. This will make it easier to mark the button placement. Then I repeat the same thing on the other side. Match up the two center fronts. I like to pin these in place for now, and then you can mark where the buttons should go. On the left front. Sew on the buttons by hand or with your machine, and then you're done. You can give your garment another press and it's ready to wear. Congratulations on your new make. Now you can remove the pins from the ties and you can tie it into a bow or a knot, but you can also do this once you've tried on the vest. If you enjoyed watching this tutorial, give it a thumbs up. You can find the link to the pattern in the description below, and happy sewing!